Well, what a pleasure today to bump into Tony Gribben from the European Training Foundation here in the auspicious United Nations in Vienna. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
We've managed to get through that introduction, which is good.
Very pleased to meet you. Yeah.
Now, Tony, tell us a little bit about the work you do. I mean, I think you're known to many of our listeners for the work that you do, certainly in a policy area, trying to change the landscape that we ultimately operate in. I was just wondering how you see, or maybe if you want to tell our listeners what it actually is you do, and then we can move on to sort of some of the challenges you sort of see in that landscape.
Well, thanks very much for taking the time to interview me, Colin. Now, what do? I work for a European Union agency, and its task is to bring policy messages from the European Union to 30 countries outside the European Union. This would be North Africa, Middle East, Eastern Europe, and as far out to Central Asia. So 30 countries in total. And the big issue at the moment is entrepreneurship education. Inside the European Union, we have an enormous problem with, first of all, our economies are not working. Unemployment is seriously high, and particularly for youth unemployment. One example is from Spain, something like 60% of young people are unemployed. But of course, it's not only inside the European Union. The big question is, how does the global economy work, and how will it be working in the future? And policymakers are clutching at the straws in the wind. They're trying to find solutions which can not only bring some kind of respite to today's economy, but the issue is about how are we going to address this in the future. And entrepreneurship education seems to be one way forward. The difficulty, of course, is that because entrepreneurship is now becoming, dare I use the word sexy, it's becoming an interesting policy area. The problem is that people don't really know what it's about. So policy is being created on the hoof.
Is it also a risk there that, there's a higher level of expectation for what the outcomes could be for entrepreneurship education being used more broadly in society?
I think that it's been considered as a panacea, and it's not yet, certainly not yet. I think we have to take stock of what policy understandings that we have and the policy knowledge we have. And this is why it's so important to be at UNIDO this afternoon and to have you moderate one of the workshops so that we can start to pull together some of the threads and start to pin down the issue of what is entrepreneurship education. Now, we heard in the room this morning that it's not only about setting up a business, but it's also by creating a more entrepreneurial character. Now, these are the types of things that I think the new economy needs. It needs people who are entrepreneurial. So, yes, they can go and start up with their own business, but just as importantly, that when someone decides business is not for them, but they want to become an employee, that they're an entrepreneurial employee. They step into the business, they bring added value onto the job, they create that job becomes more productive, the business becomes more competitive. And it's the competitive businesses which create the jobs.
It's almost like, it sounds like there's a potential paradox that's sort of looming in front of us, and that is we get people's attention at a policy level and a high up in an institutional level when we sort of say, entrepreneurship education, economic performance, jobs, growth, these types of outcomes. But then at the same time, underneath that debate, a lot of us are trying to say it's not just about business, it's also about mindsets and actually changing the way people think and are able to sort of view the world through a different set of lenses. Are we not running the risk that we're sort of getting the hand to go out to sort of help us on one hand because people see entrepreneurship education and the economic benefits it may bring to society, and we're actually really arguing more for a change to the education system itself?
Well, I think the new paradigm is about giving taking responsibility away from the institutions and bringing it much more to the individual. I think through the new paradigm of entrepreneurship education is essentially by getting young people to be more aware that they're going to have to be responsible for defining their own future, and that it will not be organisations and it will not be the state who will create the job for them, but they're going to have to take much more responsibility for their own career choice and their own career development. And that's an essential element of the entrepreneurial learning drive. It's about giving responsibility back to the school, back to the teacher, and ultimately to the pupils. Now, this paradigm is going to take some time to develop. But unfortunately, I feel that particularly in the Western world, is where we've regulated every aspect of life, including education. Through this regulation, we have eliminated the creativity, particularly of teachers, and in the environment in which they work. And ultimately that hits off in students. Students don't like the learning anymore. So I think we need to, it's a rethinking process that needs to happen, particularly at policy level. The biggest issue at the moment, I think, is that, but where I see there's an opportunity, is I see there's a policy tension. One aspect of policy looks at growth. And this would be the people who think much more neoliberally. They're much more concerned about how markets perform and how those markets can generate wealth.
Sure.
That's fine. That's what I would call the market model of entrepreneurship. On the other side, we have what I call the equity model of entrepreneurship. This is essentially to see how we can get entrepreneurship to address issues regarding the individual or their community. Now, some people refer to social entrepreneurship. A lot of the efforts would be involved in establishing self-employment programs or whatever. These two pillars, one the market model and one the social equity model, the opportunity is that they need to be co-worked together. So the thing about entrepreneurship education is that it's a multi-party agenda. The left cannot say this is our policy area, and the right cannot say that it's their policy area. But the left and right can come much more centre stage and see value in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that certainly I've been working on with some of my colleagues, and it's trying to provide a unification, if you want, of entrepreneurship education, a business startup process with enterprise education, the mindset type of benefits. The landscape, as you see it, if I was able to give you a magic wand and let you go about and sort of bring in one thing that you think might actually have the biggest impact at a policy level, what would that be?
Leadership. I would like to see every education authority, every education ministry having a dedicated ambassador who's responsible for watching what's happening in terms of entrepreneurship education. Now, this could be a deputy minister, it could be a state secretary. It takes a leadership to clearly identify that this is a policy. This is a policy that we will continue to develop. While leadership at a policy level is extremely important, I think we also need, at ground level, we need to identify those educators, practitioners, trainers who are already doing very, very interesting stuff. Because policy, we're still not that sure that we're going to get the policies correct, but the policy leadership must connect down with the practitioners, learn from the practitioners, and I think this is when policy will actually start to have an impact, because it'll be the practitioners who will shape the policy discussions and ultimately the policy decisions. So it's closing the gap between policy and practitioner, and I think that's the landscape we need to be working towards.
Fantastic. Tony, really appreciate your time today, and I'm sure our listeners will have enjoyed listening to you as well.
Enjoyed meeting you again, Colin.